Welcome, welcome all of you divine souls. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, let us start today's session by paying our salutations and our gratitude in the lotus feet of Lord Shri Krishna. Bhaje Vraje Kamandanam Samast Pap Khandanam Swabhakta Chitta Ranjanam Sadaiva Nandanandanam Supicha Gucha Mastakam Sunad Vedu Hastakam Anangarang Sagaram Namami Krishna Nagaram Namami Krishna Nagaram. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Welcome all of you, divine souls. You know, we all are, in essence, the same consciousness. And I pray to Lord Krishna, who is the Jagat Guru, you know, the Guru of all Gurus, to bless all of us, to bless this creation, the entire creation, to bless all of us with this divine wisdom. So today, we will be continuing our journey on Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, shloka 14 and 15. Do you know that unless you have this knowledge of your own true self, you will not be able to understand the working of this divinity, of this universe. You know, all this divine knowledge, it begins with the knowledge of self, the knowledge of our true self. You know, Bhagavan Shri Krishna follows the same approach in Bhagavad Gita. He begins by explaining that what we call as the self, you know, is really the soul. You know, we think that we are this body, but actually the self is our soul. It is not the material body. And the self or the soul is eternal, just as God himself is eternal. So today we shall be going very deep into this aspect of knowledge of our inner self. So stay with us till the end. But before we start, you know, kindly allow me to pay my gratitude to my Guru. My Guru is here with me, listening to this wonderful, you know, divine talk. Om Ram Shri Kanhaiya Lal Sharmaye Namaha. Om Shri Guruve Namaha. You know, Bhagavan Shri Krishna starts with this knowledge that this soul is eternal. So, you know, if this soul is eternal, that it implies that, you know, there is life after death. See, the soul is always there, it is eternal. But this body goes away. So that means there is life after death. After this death of this material body, there is life. See, the only thing that remains unchanged is that our Atma, our soul, which is eternal. And it passes from one body to another body. You know, at the end or at the death of the physical body, the soul changes the bodies from one body to another body. So according to Lord Shri Krishna, the one who knows this truth is a Pandit. And such a wise man would never grieve at the death of any person, since the only thing that dies is your own physical body. Your soul does not die. It's only our physical existence that dies. That is the physical realm. But one obvious question that comes up at this point is that there is no reason for one to grieve at the passing of the physical body. No. Still, why do we still experience happiness and sadness on a daily basis? Why do we experience that? So Bhagwan Shri Krishna is the all-knowing. He is the God. He is all-knowing and so compassionate. So he addresses this question in the next verse. See, the question is, why do we still experience happiness and sadness? Why we keep on alternating with sometimes happy, sometimes sad, sometimes joyous, sometimes grieving? So Lord Shri Krishna says, Matra sparshāstu kaunteya shītoshna sukha dukkada agam apaya niyuno nityasa tansam titiksha bharatva. Titiksha. The Lord Krishna now first addresses Arjuna as Kaunteya. Kaunteya means the son of Kunti. Kunti, the son of Kunti. So he says that it is the Matra Sparshas, which means the contact. Sparsh is the contact between the senses and the objects of the senses, the sense objects. It is this contact, sparsh, between our senses and the object of the contact, the object of the senses, that gives rise to our temporary perceptions of whether it is sukh, meaning happiness, or it is dukh, meaning distress. Sukha dukkhada. And these are anitya, meaning these are non-permanent. And they come and go, like, the seasons, they come. The winter season comes and then the summer season comes. That way, the sukh and dukh, they are anitya, they are non-permanent. They come and go. So one must learn to tolerate them. That is titikshasva. We must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. The human body has 5 senses, or we say the Panch Jnanendriyas. And these 5 senses are our sense of sight, the eye see, our sense of smell, taste, touch, and the sense of hearing. And when these senses, they come into contact with the objects of perception, they give rise to sensations of happiness and distress. None of these sensations is permanent. They come and go like the changing seasons. Happiness or sadness is just the result of these senses coming in contact with the objects of perception. Just like you experience cool water. So in summer, it is so soothing, the cool water. But the same cool water, when you touch in the winter, you will shiver. So these sensations are transitory. They are like the changing seasons, which are never permanent. Anitya. So if we do not learn to tolerate them, we would become like a pendulum, which always sways from one side to the another side, without being able to focus on any one thing. Our sense organs, they are reactively very sensitive. In fact, their nature is to respond to any outside stimuli which we receive, which can be either pleasure or pain. Our senses have been conditioned to have very strong likes and dislikes. When we like a thing, it produces enjoyment. When we dislike anything, it causes repulsion and it causes pain. When good and bad, or hot or cold, or material objects, they come into contact with our senses, with the sense organs, with our indriyas. The result is pleasure and pain, or heat and cold. In fact, these sensations are all transitory. Lord Shri Krishna says a man should bear them with patience, with mental evenness, sambhav or titikshas. For example, when we keep our eyes, we keep ice in our hand, the cool sensation, we have the sensation of a cool, this is reported to our brain. And then our mind reacts through perception and recognizes this sensation as cold. Now our mind then interprets this sensation, whether it is pleasurable or painful or disagreeable. And then our body, it responds accordingly based on the stimuli of the mind. See, similarly, all our experiences, whether the experience of cold or heat or, all these senses must be first converted into our mental perception. In short, our mind is the sole power for recognition of these bodily sensations. Suppose somebody gives you that chloroform, you get unconscious. You will not be able to have any sensation, whether anything cold is put on you or hot is put on you, you will not have any sensation. Sensations are powerful or they are powerless, depending on whether the mind is affected by them or is not affected by them. So this is the reason why, man's mind becomes, sometimes when you are in extreme cold or extreme hot climate, then your mind becomes acclimatized. Then you have a strong, controlled mind, that can ignore even this external stimuli. It becomes conditioned. It doesn't mean that we should continue to torture our body. Lord Shri Krishna's purpose is not to ask you to torture our body, but it only means that we have the power to condition our mind and body. When we become oversensitive to pain and pleasure, there is a slight pain and we become so much sensitive. There is a slight pleasure and then we are overjoyous. So when we are oversensitive to either pain or pleasure, what happens? It only weakens our mind. And then it causes a lot more of pain and suffering and constant mental irritation. When a person, he adopts a kind of a sambhav or kind of a transcendental state towards whether they are joy or whether there is sorrow. His mind, when it remains unruffled, in equipoise, he attains what he calls as sambhav. This is what a yogi is made up of. And what happens to those who learn to tolerate these dualities and who do not get swayed by these temporary sensations of happiness and distress? Now Lord Shri Krishna describes the quality of those people, of those noble people who are not affected by these dualities of life. So what happens to those people? Lord Shri Krishna is describing in the next shloka, shloka number 15. Lord Shri Krishna says, Yam hina vyatantyate purusham purushar sammadukka sukham dhiram so amritattvaya kalpate. Lord Shri Krishna says, O Arjun, Purush Arsham. Purush Arsham means the noblest of the noble amongst men. That person who is not affected by happiness or by distress and remains steady in both of these situations. He becomes eligible, kalpate, for amritatvaya. That means for liberation. He becomes eligible for moksha, for kaivalya. See, if you notice, in the previous verse, Bhagwan Shri Krishna explained that both the sensations of happiness and distress or joy and sorrow, they are both temporary, they are fleeting. Now he encourages Arjun to use his discrimination or his intellect to rise above these dualities of happiness and distress, to become equipoised somehow, to look at joy and sadness with equipoise. But in order to develop this kind of discrimination, we must first understand the answers to two important questions. What are those? Firstly, why do we desire for happiness? And second is, why doesn't material happiness then satisfy us? See, the answer to the first question is very simple. As we know, we are all, the tiny particles of that infinite divine, the Brahm, the God. We are all part of God. Anant, that timeless, that endless, that formless, Nirgun, Nirakar, Brahm, that vast ocean of pure bliss. Sat, Chitta, Anand. So we are all part and parcel of that infinite bliss. Therefore, it is our natural tendency to be drawn towards that infinite source of bliss. We are naturally drawn because we are a part of that bliss. Just as a child is drawn towards his mother, there is an attachment. Similarly, we are drawn towards the source from where we have come from. Therefore, whatever we do in this world is for the sake of happiness, is to attain that happiness. Now, let us understand the answer to the second question. Why doesn't material happiness satisfy us? We all want to be happy. But then the material happiness is only fleeting. It doesn't satisfy us. Why? Because the soul, our soul, that is the true self, being a very tiny part of our infinite consciousness, is divine, is itself divine in nature, like God himself. Hence, the happiness that the soul seeks, our soul seeks that happiness which is also divine. Now, if divine happiness it seeks, then what is the quality of a divine happiness? The quality of divine happiness is it should meet three characteristics. See, the divine bliss must be infinite in extent. It should be infinite. It must be permanent. That is the quality of divine. And it must be ever fresh. But the happiness that we experience through the contact of our senses with their objects, is exactly the opposite. That happiness is temporary. That happiness is finite. That is why the material happiness that we perceive through the body, through the senses, can never satisfy that divine soul. The nature of consciousness, or you may call it the God or the soul. It can be described as Sat Chit Anand. Sat means truth. Chit means consciousness. And Anand means bliss. So certainly in any definition, truth is going to be the essential part that cannot be dropped. Truth has to be there. Now, this one word, Sat Chit Anand, has been cut into three, just to explain it to you. Because, in English, there cannot be one word for all the three. You cannot join truth, consciousness, and blissfulness in a single word. But the Sanskrit word is Satchidanand. Satchidanand. All the three words are joined. Sat is there, Chit is there, Anand is there, but they are not separate. They are not separate. We must understand this. There is no gap. Satchidanand. This experience is one orgasmic, organic. It is a unitary experience. It does not come in parts. It does not come as truth comes first, and consciousness comes second and Anand comes later. No, it comes all together as a one unit. In fact, there is no way to create any demarcation between these three. That this is truth, this is consciousness, and this is bliss. In other words, in fact, truth is consciousness, and consciousness is bliss. They are all same. Or bliss is consciousness, and bliss is truth, and consciousness is truth. They are not separate. It is not possible to, separate one, drop truth, and just be with consciousness and bliss. It cannot happen. They are one intrinsic unity and organic unity. So, with this discrimination, we must learn to tolerate both the perception of material happiness as well as the sensation of material distress. We should learn to tolerate both joy and sadness and sorrow. Only then we will rise above these dualities. And then the material energy will no longer be able to bind us. So, as long as, we are the slaves, hum log daas hain. Till the time we are the slaves of these dualities, we always will live a life of bondage, of a bondage to senses. Our likes and dislikes, they are, in fact, the expressions of our ego self, our ego mind. And they are responsible for the bondage of the soul to the body and our earthly environment. Our feelings of pleasure and sorrow have a common father. We can say they have a common cause, a common factor. They both, our pleasure and sorrow, they both originate from our desire. See, when you desire, you have a desire for certain thing. When your desire is fulfilled, it results in temporary pleasure. So you have this sensation of pleasure when your desire is fulfilled. But when something obstructs our desires, then what happens? It results in pain and sorrow. If your desire is not met, our attachment to both the pleasure or aversion to the pain, they both destroy this equilibrium of our true nature. That is why, if you remember, Maharshi Patanjali has said, avidya, asmita, raga, dvesh, abhinivesha, klesha. These are the 5 kleshas. Raga, dvesh, the pleasure or aversion to pain. Lord Shri Krishna says that those who are unaffected and unmoved in both joy and sorrow, they are eligible for liberation, or they are eligible for moksha. Everything we do in this life is actually with a purpose to eventually merge with that one consciousness from where we have come. Hamari yatra anant tak hai. Yoga philosophy has proved that the real happiness lies in that constant mental state of tranquility, of that unruffled peace during all the experiences of our earthly dualities. This is yoga. If we have a changeable mind, a fickle mind, which is easily disturbed, but the unchangeable soul and the unruffled mind, they always rest in that eternal spirit. This is Sat Chit Anand. Only those having this true knowledge, they can design an extraordinary life for themselves. So with this, I seek the blessings of Lord Shri Krishna to complete this session here. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So I'm open for any question or answer. Anybody has got any doubts or any questions, I will try to answer them. And maybe if you want to talk, I can unmute you. So thank you all of you for coming together for this wonderful satsang. I thank my Guru. I thank Lord Shri Krishna for giving us this opportunity of being together. Thank you. Yeah, Manish Mishra ji. Sir, how we will become fearless? Now, very, very nice question. Manish ji, thank you. Thank you so much for answering that wonderful question. How do we become fearless? Now, fear, as I told you, Maharshi Patanjali has said, and initially also, when we started, the knowledge about our true self, when we forget that, when we are away from that knowledge, in fact, one is the ego consciousness. When we have this ego consciousness, we think that we are a separate entity from everything else. And opposite, this is the avidya. This is agyan. This is one extreme of agyan. And what is true knowledge? That we are part of that infinite. Now, just notice between these two. The moment we are in this ego consciousness, we always have this fear. All fears, they arise from our ego consciousness. The more we are in this avidya, in this, ego consciousness that I am separate, the more you will be fearful. You will be fearful of your life, fearful about criticism, fearful about what others will say, fearful about everything. All the fears, they originate out of our ego consciousness. The moment you surrender to that divinity, the moment you start realizing that I am part of that blissful soul, I am that, Aham Brahmasmi, you start experiencing that, all your fears will go away. This is the only thing. When you are away from the ego consciousness, when you are in that vibration of that divinity, in that infinite, all your fears will go away. You will never, never, ever, ever fear. So I hope I have answered your question. So, yeah, Vandana ji has said, does Sat means eternal? Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Yes. As we said, Sat Chit Anand, Satchid Anand. There is nothing separate. Sat is not separate from Chit and not separate from Anand and not separate from infinite. So actually, that is the true nature of that bliss, truth, and Satchidanand. That is endless, Anand, eternal. So Sat is also eternal, Chit is also eternal, Anand is also eternal, and these three are one another. So Sat is Anand, Sat is Chit, Chit is Anand, so vice versa. So Sat means eternal, yes. Shivaji has said, Mr. Shiv, how to burn past life karmas. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. This is exactly what Lord Shri Krishna is telling us. How do you become eligible for moksha? How do you see? You can become eligible for moksha only when you have exhausted all your past karmas, right? And we all know this. Now, how can we exhaust our past karmas? When we start having this true knowledge. One is a true knowledge of about true self, that we are part of the divine. Then you move away from that ego consciousness. And then you start rising above these dualities of life. You start having this somehow. Then you are neither very happy when there is pleasure, nor you are very sorrowful when there is sorrow. You are, somehow you are not affected by the joys and the pleasures and the sorrows. You start rising above these dualities, then your karma starts getting exhausted. Because all your karmas are basically the life lessons to evolve you higher and higher. And your evolution is basically towards Kaivalya, towards moksha. So Lord Shri Krishna here says, the moment you are starting above, getting above these dualities, the moment you start having this sambhav, you are not, हम कहते हैं ना, लिप्त नहीं हुए, सांसारिक चीजों में लिप्त नहीं हुए. So then we start, becoming eligible for moksha. That means all our karmas, they started getting exhausted by that time. So this is the only way to burn all your past life karmas. They will get burned. Thank you. So thank you all of you divine souls for these wonderful, wonderful questions. And we are blessed by Lord Shri Krishna. We all thank you, all of you. So with this, we take permission of Lord Shri Krishna to end this session. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.